So if you can hear... All right, folks, it is time to come back. Welcome back to class. I hope you had a nice midday break. I am here to move through our last couple of chapters today. Before we get started, I want to do a couple of just, a little sound check, make sure things are okay, and then we'll do a fun thing before we get back in the book. So first thing I'm going to do is I want you to take a look at all the steps I have on my slide here. Sometimes when Laura and I switch presenters or WebEx flashes and things kind of get reset. So make sure that everything in WebEx is the way that you want it to be. Everything is set up, it's arranged how you like it. You'll also want to make sure that you have, in particular, the chat and the Q&A set to all panelists. Very important there. And then when you're good to go, send in a green check mark. Green check mark when WebEx is set up, you can hear me and see me okay, all that stuff is doing all right. I'm seeing a number of those come in. Looks like a couple of people are not connected to audio. Maybe they disconnected over the long break and haven't connected yet. I will hope that by the time we're done with our fun activity, they'll be connected. But I'm seeing more of those come in. I'll wait just another few seconds here. Let you make sure that you get everything set up how you want them. Did anything particularly exciting or had any yummy food or anything over lunch? Feel free to send that in. I am a big dessert person, and they had a salted toffee blondie in our cafeteria today, so I had to get that, and it was delicious. Oh, Devin said I had Thai food. That sounds good. I love some pad see ew. Pad see ew in particular. All right, I'm seeing a lot of check marks, so I'm feeling good about everyone getting set up. So I'm going to continue on. Ooh, Lene had moved home from the office. Hopefully it's a nice and comfy switch. I definitely, well, I don't know if I would prefer to be home. Like Lauren said, it's kind of hot. And we're trying. My future mother-in-law is staying with us this week, and my fiance and I like to have the house really, really cold, and she likes it really, really warm. So we're trying to meet her in the middle, but it's a little toastier in my house than it normally is. I am also happy to be here in an office where I can control my own. All right, we are going to play a game called Can You Name All These Fruits? Send the fruits you see into the chat. I'll click play quiz. Send in some fruits. Blueberries, cucumber, lychee, star fruit, guava. I see a couple of troubleshooting things coming into the chat. The chat's about to look really bad for me and Lauren, so please send those to the Q&A. Pumpkin, papaya, pear, figs. Don't see a fig there. Watermelon, plum, blood orange. How about regular orange? Grapefruit. Oh, grapes and then grapefruit. Both of them. Kiwi, cherry, dragon fruit, lime, raspberry, strawberry, lemon, peppers, tomato, cantaloupe. Oh, I spelled that wrong on the first try. Coconut, peach, mango, let's see, zucchini, pineapple, avocado, eggplant. Yes, kiwano. That's usually a stumper. Good job getting that. Apple, banana, persimmon. That's another one that usually stumps folks. Hazelnut, passion fruit, jackfruit. We don't have any jackfruit on here actually. Pomegranate. There we go. Honeydew. It's not a jalapeno pepper. It is a different pepper. I wonder if it would give it to you. Putting that in. No, it's a different pepper though. It is a hot pepper. There we go, Pam. It's a chili pepper. Walnuts. Ooh, we got one more. What is the one more? Ooh, it's another nut. Far right side. What's this guy? Got hazelnut already. We got walnuts already. It's not Brazil, it's not macadamia, it is a chestnut. There we go. 100%. And I did not have to give a single hint. That's incredible. Usually, like I said, the persimmons I have to give a hint for, and the horned melon I give a hint for. Sometimes I need to give a dragon fruit hint, but you all got all of them on your own, which is awesome. Good job. All right. Thank you, Lauren. I do take pride, and I'm a very good typer, back in middle school in computer science class, I enjoyed the typing practice, and I got really far ahead like the people around me in like the levels of whatever program or game we were doing practice typing. All right. Thanks for playing. We're going to come back together in our next chapter. Now, I know a number of you are having a little bit of trouble towards the end of chapter 3, and I just want you to know that the next 2 chapters of Build don't really rely on anything from chapter 3. There's a very, very small part of chapter 5 where you might be missing something, but we can easily just kind of substitute that for something else in the meantime while you maybe backtrack and work on things if you want. So don't worry if you didn't get every single thing done. Lauren and I are very familiar with this class and what is needed in which chapter and when you might get tripped up by something by not having something done earlier. And I promise you can do pretty much everything for the rest of the afternoon, even if your morning wasn't perfect. Now, chapter 4 is kind of a nice break because in this chapter, we are spending the whole time in hyperspace. No text at all. So if you were not a fan of text yet, for a little bit of a break. So join me in chapter 4. We are going to talk about resource types. Now, when you were in configuring the Epic End user, you learned about 2 important records needed for setting up an individual, setting up a user. You learned about the user record itself, which allows you to log in and sets your password and your default login department. We've already talked again about provider records, which control the clinical details of what I can do. It's what allows me to set up a schedule for something like an imaging machine. But in procedure areas, there's a third important record that really makes sure that our scheduling is smooth, and that is something called a resource type. The purpose of a resource type record is to ensure we don't overbook our resources. Let's say that you have 10 nurses scheduled at a time, and all 10 of those nurses float between a number of different areas they work in throughout cardiology and radiology and endoscopy and surgery. Well, we want to make sure that we cannot schedule more than 10 procedures at the same time that all need this special type of nurse. Because if we schedule 11 and the system doesn't warn us that we're about to overbook our nurses, we're going to get to the day of and we're going to be sad because one of those procedures is going to get delayed because no one is free. So this chapter, we're going to see what is a resource type record, how do we use it to ensure that we don't overbook our resources, and how do we make this resource type available to every provider that can fill that role. Ooh, good question. Are resources always staffed? The answer is no. So in Cupid, they usually are staffed, but in OpTime in particular, we do it a lot for equipment and instruments as well. If we only have 3, let's say, C-arms, you can't schedule 4 procedures at the same time that need C-arms, which is certainly a thing you could do with cardiology procedures as well. So no, resources would not always be staffed. With that, you can join me on page 4.5. We're going to talk about our kind of overall build staffs with resource types before we dive into our own records. Now, a resource type itself is just a record that you can create, and it's within that record that you define that availability. How many of that thing do we have scheduled at a time? Once we build that resource type record, we have to connect it to 2 different places. The first place is we are going to link it to provider records to indicate, well, which people or which machines can fill that role in a procedure. So if we create a resource type for a sedation nurse, well, which of our staff can actually be sedation nurses? Not everyone. The step after that is going to be to specify when, or you can think about that as in which procedures, that's very small, let's make that a little bigger. In which procedures is that resource necessary? Not all of our procedures need a sedation nurse. Not all of our procedures need a cardiologist. Not all of our procedures need an anesthesia provider. Now, I'll give you a little kind of heads up here that we actually aren't going to be able to do step 3 until chapter 5, because the record that we'll connect your resource type to is something we don't learn about until chapter 5. So we're going to get through steps 1 and 2 in this chapter, and then we'll see how we can do step 3 when we get to chapter 5. We've got a scenario box at the bottom of 4.5 that says that we've got a group of nurses at our organization that work throughout the radiology and cardiology areas. We have 12 nurses on shift at any given time, so we want to make sure that not only do we not overbook more than 12 procedures, so overbook our nurses, but we also want to make sure we're evenly spreading our pool of nurses around our different departments. We don't want the cath lab to take all 12 nurses, and then CT and NIC and XR and MR are all kind of out of luck.
Just check it in, huh?
We're going to be doing this build in hyperspace, so join me in hyperspace as your administrator.
Really?
I've made my hyperspace green here just so it looks a little different
What do
from
you
here
mean?
than
How
it
so?
was before, but I'm having a green so we changed it to green. And I'd like you to give me a green check mark when you're logged in as your admin to hyperspace. You're seeing the same screen that I am.
Well, that's because that's
ready to start
school.
build. Green check when you're
A sports school. Okay.
Just asked a great question. How can we change the color of hyperspace?
Are you regretting your decision to quit?
My settings, themes.
Okay.
My settings and themes, if you're interested. I like to change mine during class just so that the WebEx hyperspace looks different from yours, so that you know which one is yours and which one is mine. So I'd recommend you don't use green if you want to change your own color. Though if you want to
All
challenge
right.
yourself.
I
You
get ya.
certainly can. All right, I see a lot of text, so
How's
we're
work
going to
going?
keep going. We are going to jump back into that Cupid admin component of our dashboard. We are looking for the resource types ORT hyperlink.
About what?
ORT, fun fact, stands for OR tank.
Why is that?
Very strange INI, but it's because ORT is kind of the master file where Optime puts random stuff. Kind of like I always think the junk drawer of your kitchen. If you don't know where to put the scissors, but you want scissors in your kitchen, they go in that one drawer. That's kind of what the ORT master file is in Optime. We'll click that link. Now, the thing about creating a resource type record is that secretly, behind the scenes, this updates a category list. So it's kind of some historical reasoning for why that is that I won't go into now. But just know that because we're updating a category list behind the scenes, only one person can create one of these records at a time. So to make sure that we all have a record that we can work with, Lauren and I have created a record for you that's blank. So we haven't done anything to it. But back home, you are welcome to try to create your own resource type record if you'd like. Just know that if you kind of get blocked out, it probably means someone else is trying to do the same thing at the same time. And that's what the critical box on 4.6 is explaining.
Okay.
So on the search tab, search for your build prefix, TRNCV, your two numbers,
So what are you going to do about it? You going to stick with
and you
it?
should find a nurse resource type. This is a record we'll configure to indicate that we need a nurse in this exam.
Okay.
Open that record when you're ready and join me on the first form.
Enjoying all the work, huh?
General information form where we set some of our basic things. So, if we wanted to change the abbreviation, if we don't have a lot of space, or if we wanted to add some synonyms for easy searching, we could do that.
Oh, you ain't going to change? Yeah.
You can also configure how this resource looks on the snapboard. Does anyone remember where on the snapboard would we see this? Think back to fundamentals. When did we see a list of resources? Yeah, lots of good answers coming in. Ooh, now they're coming so fast I can't even see names. Those of you that had class with me yesterday, funds with me yesterday, I see a lot of your names in there because it's probably fresh in your mind. But if you think about it, there are two main places where we would see this resource on the snapboard. The first is the resources side, which is where you go to assign resources to exams. You can also see this on a case or appointment on the schedule because an icon, remember, equals an unmet
All right,
resource.
kill it.
So all our ends, the total top thousand is when they.
Bye, Pinky. Love
And so
you.
that is the record that we're configuring
Okay, bye.
here. When we see a case or an appointment or some sort of exam on the snapboard, and it's got, in this case, it was this little yellow person icon, we know that we are missing that resource from our resources that are assigned. That's the record that we're configuring. Now we aren't going to change the icon and the color for the purposes of class, so you're welcome to if you want to go a little off book. The last thing the book points out is the individual template section, which is basically how many places can one of this resource be in at a time. And for most human people and hunks of metal, that is one place. Right? Most people, human beings, and it's machines and whatever, can be in one place at a time. I would love to be in more than one place at a time. We're not there yet. So that's why our default here is 1 and 0. Does anyone who has a clinical background know what's kind of the exception to this rule? What type of provider can
Can you stop for a
actually be
minute?
technically overseeing multiple procedures at the same time?
Are you gonna stop for a
I'm
minute?
trying to pause it. It's live. What's up?
Can you help me with
You have no
a
idea.
security
That's
issue real
fine.
quick?
This is not a clinical question. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of good answers coming in. The one that I always think about is anesthesiologists.
And I forgot my jacket.
Or if you're
Gotta bring it back.
in a different country,
Okay.
it might be
You see this
nurse
view
anesthetists. In the
with all of these
US,
different
anesthesiologists can float between a
departments?
number of
I
different
need to
cases
give
that are going on
that
at the same time,
to
as long as the
these
nurse
ladies.
anesthetist is in the room. Sometimes in other
What's
countries
the
that's
easiest way to
split.
do that?
But for
Because
those
the
users,
girl,
you
this
might
girl is
not
Kaylee
have
Wilson,
1 and 0
who
cases
is
and
a
change those numbers.
clinic nurse.
For everything you would build for Cupid though, 1 and 0 is all you need.
What is this? This is the schedule. And it's on their
Now's a
home
great time to take a
toolbar.
screenshot if you would like to. We're not changing anything, so you can hop right over to the availability form when you're ready.
I'm logged in as her.
Everybody. Wait a minute. You kind of scrub your head. Let me go pee and get back to my desk time.
All right, going once.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to get to Denise Worthington. I don't need this second one, I just need the first one.
Ginger, I see your question in the Q&A. It's a little bit of beyond the basics, so I'm going to let Laura handle it.
Because they were operations until we hear otherwise.
What was that?
Now on this form, we have a couple selections to make that are all
What was that, Katie?
related to authorization. Where can this type of user be? What types of procedures can they be in? And where can they be
But then you
scheduled?
told her that.
Yes,
First
and I tried
question
to
that
get
we're
that to her on her
asked
home thing, but
is,
it
should
didn't change any of
this
her
resource
views.
be available for cases or both? For Cupid, what do you think we're going to put here?
Yeah. Right. But what
Are we doing cases, appointments, or both?
I think they have to do that before they call it.
Yeah, I'm seeing good answers coming in. Majority of us saying both, and that's what I'm looking for. We are creating just a general kind of imaging nurse resource type. We might need this nurse to be in non-invasive exams and invasive exams, appointments, and cases. So we're going to want to check both of these boxes. Cases is selected by default mostly because this is an out-time record and they just work with cases. But we'll add that appointments checkbox too. Now the next checkbox is, do we want to perform conflict checking? Do we want to check for overbooking our resources, yes or no? For class, we are going to say yes, we definitely want to be doing that. You don't need to do this for every resource type. There are probably a number of resource types you won't conflict check for. And some organizations choose not to do this in Epic and do it kind of by referencing some of your staffing or scheduling systems as well. But we want to learn what Epic can do, so we're going to say yes, give me conflict checking. Just got a message that my camera is looking blurry off and on. I'm not sure why. But if anyone else that feels like my camera's being weird, now the first thing we need to do once we're turning on conflict checking is we need to add something called an area. An area is just a free text label for one group of resources. So if you're a very large organization, you might have a pool of these imaging nurses at your main hospital. You might have another pool of nurses at your rural hospital. You might have another pool of nurses at your,
Yeah, what did they call me?
south side. Those are three different hospitals. If they're all far away from each other, we're not gonna move nurses between them. We're just got pool number one, pool number two, pool number three. So this is your way of kind of defining what you want those groups to be. It's a free text thing. You can call it as you want. The book has this hospital A. Feel free to follow that to the letter. I'm going to say that all these nurses work in Bennett's Best Hospital.
Remember, we are run by the Houston Healthcare Authority, which is a subservient of.
Maybe I'll have one Monday.
It's supposed to be agency state and do whatever they want.
And this group of nurses includes a number of specific
So able
departments.
is, they got everybody they need,
And they can't live.
5,000 is,
5,000.
Well, the answer to your question is yes, but we're not quite there yet. We're going to get there in the next thing that we do. Now, within this area, you're going to add specific departments and locations. The first thing I want you to search for, and this is step 5 on 4.7, we're going to look for our interventional radiology area, which is called EMH IR imaging.
I've been here 17 years and I've never had any
EMH
question.
IR imaging.
They called it when that school collapsed the Enterprise.
When we search
Oh,
for
that's
that, we
right,
get
that's right, with
mass
that tornado.
Mass casualty trauma.
You see a
That was
result
2008,
for
wasn't it?
department.
Say a Greyhound or.
The result.
Yeah, the tornado in Enterprise, it took out the school,
Yeah.
I remember that.
When you're building out a resource type, you'll choose
And
the
honestly, during a
department
couple of our hurricanes, they called them.
if that area uses
Here,
appointments.
so, you know. Oh, I was here, I wouldn't
The
really know.
location if that area uses cases.
They were like, you gotta come and stay tonight.
Yeah, my ass was here all night. I know.
Now I'm sure we have some people in here with some radiology or some radiant experience. Does radiant use appointments or cases?
Right.
We just gonna put our pom-poms up there, and go,
No idea.
team.
Radiology, that's fine. Ooh, I'm seeing a mix of answers. Now, I'll tell you, in the foundation system, radiology is all appointment-based. No cases at
We
all.
can't do it anymore. Bring in
There are
our
some
reserves,
organizations
bring in
out there
the
that
Army,
are on
bring
road
in
from that
whoever
for a number of
that have
reasons.
medical.
But since we're building in the foundation system, we're going to choose the department because all of radiology is an appointment. So I want you to select the EMH IR imaging department.
I noticed
And
we're
then click
putting
accept.
update all week so far.
Well, they're up to 102, that was
They
yesterday.
were up to 107 on the week before the week.
Then we can say, all right, how many of these
You
nurses
know, the 117 was
IR
on
department
max the entire
use
first lane.
freely, and could they kind of bypass a warning for any extras if they need it? We're not going to deal with any
And why,
other
if you
books
were in your
for
bag,
class, so we're just going to say, all right, invasive areas can have 4 procedures going on at the same time that
I get the revenue thing, but
we're going
then
to say 4 openings and 0 overbooks.
I mean, I understand you have to keep it open for emergencies.
Then we're going to add our next area, which is going to be the cardiac cath labs. We're going to start with the foundation system,
Review the chart
the
like they do
medical
in
hospital
teaching
one.
hospitals.
So search for
In other words, you don't
EMH
take someone
cardiac
to surgery because
cath.
their blood says that they're gonna take them to surgery. No, validate that.
And then tell me, are we going to use the department for the cath lab, or are we going to use the location?
Is the benefit worth the risk?
Are we using the department or the location for the cath lab? Think about the way schedule.
Lord.
Seeing a lot of good answers. For those of you that are trying to think about it, remember, departments are used for appointment-based scheduling. Locations are used for case-based scheduling. Does that help you? Little hint there. Feel free to send something in, or if you want to change your answer you sent in before, you're welcome to. Before I yeah. Cath lab, we schedule cases for invasive cardiology, so we're choosing the location. We're really seeing like the full force of what Lauren was telling you about this morning. Is that one of the most important things to learn in Cupid is what is non-invasive in appointments and what is cases for invasive. In this case, cath lab, invasive cardiology, that's a case. When you add it to your list, you can always double check that you chose the right thing by looking at that type column. And since this is also an invasive area, we're going to say 4 openings and 0 overbooks. Now the summary of that is the critical box at the top of 4.8. This is a great one if you want to like highlight it or put a flag here, or if you printed a book, you want to put a sticky note or something. Very, very important critical box there. Now the next thing you're going to do, and I'm going to let you do this for just a minute or so on your own, is I want you to add additional departments and locations so that your screen matches the book. We're going to add 4 more places, 3 departments and 1 location. And I want you to give me a green check mark when you have all those added. I'm going to freeze my screen and do the same thing, and I'll unfreeze it for you to check your work in a minute or 2.
It says no information concerning the disaster will be released to anyone except through administration of community relations anyway. To number 3, employees are to remain in their own areas until otherwise directed. Personnel should continue normal working schedules unless otherwise directed. Department director or supervisors are responsible for staff. All personnel shall wear the
And I just saw a message come in that 3 of them didn't give me an option to choose a type, and that's because that location record is actually not used by every single area. We're going to talk about that actually at the end of the day tomorrow. So if you're wondering, why did some of them only have a department? We're going to learn more about that tomorrow. I'm slowly seeing some green check marks come in. I'm going to wait another 30 seconds or so before I unfreeze my screen here for you.
At code 5000, all visiting hours will be canceled. All elective surgery will be canceled and necessary patients discharged.
Alright, to unfreeze my screen is the same as the way the screenshot in your book looks. The very last steps of this section on 4.8 is to add your own cardiac NIC department. So once you have a full list of Epic Medical Hospital ones, or even if you don't have a full list yet, it's okay, it's not going to impact anything. But I want to make sure that everyone has their own department listed here. So back in that look for a department field, I want you to search for your build prefix, cardiac NIC. and give yourself 1 opening and 0 overbooks. If you don't have the rest of the departments and locations, that's totally fine. The one I want everyone to have is their own. So add your own now.
See right here on the needs or code table, it says surgery.
And then we have one
During
last thing
normal
we need to do in this
working
record.
hours, upon notification of code
Now,
conditions
think back to the
visible
scenario I
to
explained to you.
notify
How
all
many total
supervised
nurses do we
personnel
staff
will
at a
not
time?
leave the
How
assigned
many
work
of these
areas
nurses
without
do we staff
authorization
at
from
a
the
time?
schedule
Who
board.
remembers?
Wow.
Yeah, first quick answer from Lene, 12. Now, if we add up all of our different openings,
Think they're gonna put a
It looks
moratorium
like-
on ETO and all that too?
we could
I'm looking
schedule
for anesthesia
16 nurses at the same time. That would make our nurses and our schedulers and everyone very unhappy.
Retired external disaster
Because the whole
plan.
point of
Inside,
setting this up is to make sure
SharePoint.
that we don't
Not
overbook our
SharePoint,
12
but, yeah,
nurses.
SharePoint.
That
Or
is where your
intranet.
area limits comes in. This is where we can have a kind of total number for this area. So the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to check that show area limits checkbox. And we're going to say, all right, we did kind of line by line how many nurses each place can have, but across all of them, our kind of final maximum is 12 openings and 0 overbooks. You can never go above that. Yeah, so what's the purpose of area limits? This is going to make sure that we don't overbook this area. And when I say area, I'm talking about this whole area. Because if we were to look at all of the individual rows, we have 16 total openings, which is not, it's too many. We only have 12 nurses. We just have kind of more than 12 places where nurses can be. So the area limit says, all right, we've done it one by one, what everyone is allowed to have, but overall, we have a maximum of 12. You can never go above 12 concurrent procedures. All right, now once you've gotten all that, you have your own row here. Confirm you've got a row for your own department. Confirm you've got those area limits. You are ready to go. Click accept in the lower right corner. Also on 4.9, there is a write it down box that explains that same things. That same thing that I just did. Yeah, Virginia, I see your question. We did. We created our area. Remember, it's just kind of your own free text way to group places together. So we created an area for just our a hospital, but you can have 3 hospitals in an area if they're all close to each other and you share the same pool of nurses. It's a flexible way to define your own groups of resources. All right, Heather, I see your message about how hyperspace froze. It's okay if you don't have every single area. Like I said, the one thing that I want to make sure everyone has is the one that has your department. If you don't have any of the others, you're fine. Just add your department, and then you'll be totally fine to continue. Once you click accept, you should be back on the build dashboard. Remember that step 2 of our build steps at the top of the chapter We're done with number 1. Number 2 is to take that resource type and link it to the providers that can fill that role. Now, realistically, you would be linking this resource type to a lot of people. You would link it to every single new nurse that you've hired as well. For class, we are just going to attach it to one nurse to get practice with it. But remember that when you have a lot of staff, when you're updating a lot of records, we can update these things through an import, just like Lauren was talking about back in chapter 2.
Because it didn't never make it fix it. I mean, it did never make it to Evan, and that's what worries me. Do you think they did it last night? Okay, so that wasn't.
All right. Now, wherever you are, even if you didn't finish that resource type, I want you to join me in the middle of 4.9 so that you can practice these next few steps. This is the last thing that we're going to do in this chapter. So back in hyperspace, one thing that's actually kind of nice about building providers for procedural areas like cardiology is that there are actually a number of settings that we can control and update in hyperspace. Now, we could do what we're about to do in text, but why go to text if you don't need to? So we're actually going to open a nurse's record from this procedural staff activity. So just a couple links above where you found resource types, click procedural staff, SCR. And we're going to search for the Mel nurse from your pre-class email. So Mel, whatever your college last name is. We're going to update the record of the nurse who already works for us. Swap that out for my college last name now. Open up Mel's record. You can accept the most recent contact. We don't need to make a new contact for this. On our first screen, you'll notice a couple settings that look kind of familiar to you, hopefully. We talked about referral source type before. We talked about provider type before. So we're seeing some of those same settings we've seen in text just here in hyperspace. We are going to find our way to the resource types form. This is understandably the form where you go to link resource type records to a provider. Here we can see that Mel can already fill the role of a number of different users. She can be a scrub person, she can be a control room technician, she can be a nurse practitioner, a documenter, an invasive nurse, a sedation nurse, and finally we are going to add that Mel can fill the role of the nurse that you just configured.
So, you just want me to add it right now and
So
leave
you
it all
can add
up?
your TRN CV number nurse resource type to this list. Pamela, I see your question in the chat. I'm not sure what you mean. If you could send that over to the Q&A with a little bit more information so that Lauren can help you, that would be great.
But now, keep in mind, once the patient gets a bed, it's not gonna spit those meds out of you. Okay. Okay, so, I mean, because all I have to do on the Epic side is I log into the card.
Once you have your resource type added, you can save and close Mel's record.
I mean, are you ready right now? Because it'll take me about 5 minutes. All right? All right. Bye. Well, she may have certificates this morning at 17.
I'll do that now as well.
Will you see them?
And that means that we are now also done with step 2. Or at least for one of our users. We would go and do that for all of the people that can fill that role realistically, but just Mel is fine for class. The last thing that we'll need to do is step 3, specify when the resource type is needed. Remember, I told you this is something that we are going to do in a future chapter. In fact, the next chapter, on 4.10, you have the same screenshot, the same image, the same diagram that I have on my slide. Just giving you kind of the bird's eye view of everything you need to know about where a resource type goes. When you build a new resource type, the first thing you do is you put it in the provider record of the people that can fill that role, which we just did now. So that was chapter 4. Chapter 4. Now, specifying the need for a resource type is something we're going to do in a number of future chapters. Working with a record called a visit type is chapter 5. That's the next chapter. Working with a base procedure, which is how we schedule invasive exams, is a chapter whose number I am going to guess is 12, 13. Lauren, fact check me on that. I think it's 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I'm going to say 11. She says I think it's 12. Chapter something. We're going to do it on Friday. We're going to guess chapter 12, but we'll get to it in a future chapter. So we have another place to put this resource type, but we're not quite ready to put it in any places yet. It's 12. Lauren is the smartest. Of course she knew. All right. Now, if you have any questions about resource types, send them in now. The last thing that we'll do is I'm going to, like the wind, find the review poll for this chapter so that we can review what we learned. 1 second to find those, and it'll show up on your screen. There you go. Take a couple minutes to fill out that review poll.
Oh, you don't know. So we don't know what, and I don't know what the hell to do to make it feel good, so. And I'm over here trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do in throw tables, so.
Renee said we're supposed to wait here until they call us for other whatever. There's nothing different that we do. It's operational, like it. I couldn't even believe it. That's what I was just gonna go look for and make it, but I have been,
Seeing more and more people submit the poll. We'll take just another maybe 30 seconds or a minute. Finish that up.
Thank you, my love. Sorry it was such a non-event, but hey, it's better than like something we couldn't solve. Thank you, my love. Would you like cake? I know you're like a whole cookies or whatever, but I mean, you can cheat. Miss Ozzy, I got the Ozzy up here.
what? Why did you put me here on me?
Because my cell phone, the email, no worky.
See, I got this way up, right?
All right. Poll is closing up.
So I have
Don't hit submit. It's going to submit you in a couple seconds here because we got to the end of the time I had set for it, which is totally fine. I'm going to share those anonymous results and the correct answers with you, and also unfreeze my screen so you can see my slide with all the answers, so I can take a moment to talk about these questions. So first, what are the benefits of using resource types? Looks like most people did the right thing of selecting everything.
So if you want in to know.
These are all things that we can do with resource types. Conflict checking, making sure we don't overlook our resources, and then recognizing that we can use these for both cases and appointments that require resources. This is a universal tool. Second, you build a research type, or a resource type. Did I say research? A resource type for each what? These are shareable records. Similar to how you don't need a profile for each of your users, you don't need a user role for each of your users. Resource types define a generic resource need for a procedure, which means they are shareable between the people that can fill that role. So you only need to build one document or resource type, because you're just going to use that one for your entire organization. Lastly, do you specify a resource type is needed each time a specific appointment is scheduled for cardiology cases?
Who can we throw out of here? Who can we move around?
That one.
That needs to be
Looks like we
reported to
were
the so that you know what their options are. Correct. And do they need to get up with doctors or whatever? Anything about
split on that one. You specify that a resource type is needed each time a specific type of appointment is scheduled for cardiology cases. A couple things to say here. First, remember, resource types, like I said, they're shareable records. Based on the build that we're going to see in future chapters, this is something that we're going to be able to set once in an admin record to pull in when we're scheduling. The other thing is, notice that you've got a specific type of appointment scheduled for cardiology cases. Got a little bit of a mismatch there. This is a record that can be used in both types of scheduling. Appointments are non-invasive, cases are invasive. We're not using one or the other for
All
everything.
officer, all answer the person must immediately report. So if he's on arrival, or chief messages for death,
Now with that, we are actually done with chapter 4. And it's kind of the perfect time to take our first break of the afternoon. Sometimes that first hour right after you have a meal, for those of you that had a meal, is the hardest hour. So I'm going to have us take a break. If you have any questions about anything, let us know in that Q&A window. We'll answer your questions then. I'll put a slide up with our return time. 10 minutes from now is 2:07 Central Time.
All electric surgery to be put on hold in 5,000. All electric surgery may be transferred to disaster conditions tomorrow. After normal duty hours and issue of on procedures, regulars. All attorney personnel will be given normal employee and control party None. Oh, no. For us, I don't think it's a problem. But if you're out there, active patient treatment, I think that's a problem.
Yeah, and they give them all their, all their, and how that.
Thank you.
That actually.
And I told it to be front side. But you're not, apparently most of the areas that we service are not supposed to leave. That's what I read up. I mean, if they're here and they were supposed to be off at 3, they don't get off at 3 until the code. You want it there, what? No, first of all, you can talk to your director because I don't even know if you're bad to work on time. No, salary. But you know what I'm saying? So, but that's just it, because I know that, so you just have to check with Renee and more or less check with Matt Brooks, I imagine, if he's at work and he knows that. I don't know anything about this one, other than, he's out on long-term code or whatever. We're just getting into doing anything. I was thinking. But I know that all the stuff that we were supposed to implement, and then was not implemented, but we had a deadline, and he met it. With or without what we needed, we made it. Right, So where was the urgency in the old people cry for that?
Somebody talk to me.
Where she was like that. I mean, I the way I understand it, he was like through the and then mom was lost. And then so-and-so is some overtime, so-and-so is over policy, so-and-so is over, I mean, right.
Isn't that part of it, Jane?
Yeah. You need more time, Dick?
I'm good.
Okay.
That ain't this is
Oh, I know. Hello? Hey, what's going on? We need bananas. Yep. We don't have the tea. No, I guess that's it. Probably not. Okay. All right. All right, talk to you later. Love you too. Bye-bye. Come on.
Did they divert all the air conditioning to it? How hot is it?
I mean, we're talking about it. But it's not gonna hurt to read it. I mean, you could just log in and stuff. Or you can just remove it and then remove the stuff.
Got all. Well, that's why they do it. Other than that, because it's not, that's what you like to do. I guess.
All right, folks. Thought we would come back with something a little silly. The last activity was, a big quiz, lots of typing. I want to do something a little silly, a little simple. This is TP or not TP. Can you identify the real toilet paper brands and the fake toilet paper brands? Just a little, time to chuckle or whatever it might be. So I'm going to have you give me green checks if you think that the toilet paper brand I show you is a real one. Give me a red X if you think it's fake. So the first one here is called Presto. It is ultra soft, plush, and thick toilet paper. Green check if you think this is a real toilet paper brand. Red X if you're like, nah, it doesn't sound like a real one. So far, we are not impressed by Presto as a brand. Now, I'm sorry to tell you that it's a real one. It's a real brand. Ultra soft. All right, the next one is Green Squared. Green to a higher power. Ultra soft bath tissue. Is this a real one or a fake one? Give me a check or an X. Devin here in the Q&A saying that anything can be toilet paper if you put your mind to it. That is probably true. That always just makes me think of that scene from Along Came Polly. If anyone's ever seen that movie, where he has IBS, but he eats spicy food to impress the girl, and then he does not have a good time afterward. All right, we are split down the middle about Green Squared, actually. It is literally right now 12 and 12. Ooh, 12 and 13. The no's have officially overtaken. If you want to fight for it, and you haven't sent in a check or an X, do so now. Going once. Going twice. Oh, we got another no. Going 3 times. This is a real one. It's another real one. Green to a higher power. Green Squared. It's a real thing. Where can you buy it? I have no idea. But it's a real one. I am. Someone's saying I'm photoshopping these. I haven't, I promise. And actually, I did not even make this PowerPoint. So I could be giving you bad information and not even know it. We're going to do one more here. Shiny Hiney. Ultra soft for ultra cleaning. Is this a real one or not? At this point, it's like it's a mind game, right? Is it that you have to say no because there's been 2 yeses in a row and you can't have 3 yeses in a row? Or is this basically a PowerPoint of everything's a real toilet paper and all of it is a trick? Andrew says if this isn't real, I'm trademarking it. Well, we'll see. We'll see. We are overwhelmingly thinking that this is not a real toilet paper brand. How could someone? This is what one. I have a friend who always complains about like slogans and brand names and stuff when he thinks they're dumb because he's like, imagine being in that pitch meeting where someone says it should be called Shiny Heiny and no one fights it. Like imagine being a fly on that wall. Well, I'm happy to tell you, Andrew, that this is not a real toilet paper brand. This is one that you could trademark if you'd like to. I don't know if it's trademarked for something else, but it is not a real toilet paper brand that I know of. Maybe in a year we'll all start seeing Shiny Heiny in the stores, and Andrew's gonna mention my name when he's interviewed for big news stations. All right. Hope you enjoyed TP or not TP. That is the question. Maybe we'll do a couple more toilet paper. There are many more slides. Maybe another day. We'll play the game again. All right. Let's come back together. We're done with chapter 4. We've got 2 chapters left. Chapter 5 is a big one. Chapter 5 is a really, really, really important record that we're going to learn about because we are talking about rules for scheduling. This is like the scheduling chapter for non-invasive exams. We are going to learn about a really important, really central record, something that is going to make sure that our cardiology departments are running smoothly. Because when we schedule an exam, we have a lot of stuff that we need to consider. How long is it? Do we have any special resource needs? Who can actually perform this? What lab or room does it need to be in? There's a lot of stuff to consider. We want to make sure that the system is doing as much of the considerations as possible so that we free up the brain space of our users so that things just kind of flow. That's what we're going to learn about here in chapter 5. Now I want you to join me on page 5.4 where we are going to learn about visit types. There was a critical box in the fundamentals book about visit types, so maybe the name, the phrase kind of sounds familiar, but if not, that's okay. We're going to focus on the visit types in this chapter, which is a record that contains settings mostly related to scheduling. That mostly is an important one because we have some special imaging settings. We'll make We're going to focus in this chapter on visit types and scheduling, but you'll see that this is going to become a useful record for other things in our workflows as well that aren't necessarily scheduling. So it's settings mostly related to scheduling. Now I've got a number of examples on my slide here of things that this controls. You do not have to write these all down. You could take a screenshot if you want. You've got the slideshow you can get to after class. We're also going to talk about most of these at some point. But a visit type is going to control how long is this usually? Who is allowed to schedule this exam? What questions do I need to ask the patient during the exam? What resources are needed? A lot of things related to scheduling. So join me on page 5.4. Visit types are a record that we're going to build in both hyperspace and text. We're going to use hyperspace to make standard settings. We're going to use text to make imaging specific settings. And this is going to become kind of a common theme if you haven't already noticed it. Is that there are some records that we can configure in hyperspace, but there are some very important imaging settings that live only in text. It's true of providers, it's true of departments, it's going to be true of visit types as well. All right, page 5.4. We'll start our journey with visit types in hyperspace. So I'm going to hop back to hyperspace here. We're still logged in as our administrators. you're going to go down to scheduling admin, go for the visit types master file.
Yeah.
PRC, I think is supposed to stand for procedure. I don't love that because in the next chapter we're going to talk about a record that's called procedure. So I just think the master file here for visit types is not the most informative, unfortunately. So click that visit types link. We're going to be creating something from scratch. So hop over to the create tab and call this record your bill prefix stress 60, which means this is a stress test that standardly is 60 minutes unless modified. Your bill prefix stress 60. You'll notice we've got a lot of forms going on the left side. We are not going to be going into nearly most of them. We're going to focus on the ones that control some core settings, some things that are most important to Cupid. And we're going to start on the first form because we've got a red stop sign yelling at us. We need an abbreviation. If we don't have a lot of space, what are we going to say? And we're going to have this say your bill prefix STR. Your bill prefix STR. Now, easy to miss is the status field just to the right of where you were before. You're going to mark this as active. This record is active in the system, should be available for use. We'll also here define the default length for this appointment, which is going to be 60 minutes. So we'll talk a little bit about how we could modify that time dynamically depending on certain factors. So just 3 settings on this first form. And then we're going to find our way to the instructions form. Third form from the list on the left. There are 2 different types of instructions that we could add into this visit type. Scheduling instructions are for the scheduler. So where would we see scheduling instructions? Think about the make appointment activity. Think about ancillary orders. Think about, I don't know, any other activity that a scheduler is using. Patient instructions then are going to appear anywhere that the patient can see information. So think about my chart. Think about appointment confirmation messages. The one place where patient instructions appears that's sometimes seems a little counterintuitive is actually the appointment review window. Now, I should have taken a screenshot of this before I didn't, but if you think about when you're making an appointment, when you finally pick a time and you click schedule, there's a little window that pops up that says, okay, this is the patient, this is the visit type, this is how long it's going to be. And it just asks the scheduler to confirm certain things with the patient. That window also shows patient instructions so that the scheduler, when they're confirming the appointment, can read off the instructions that the patient will need to follow. So that's kind of an interesting one, an interesting spot where patient instructions actually appear to the scheduler. Now, we could type up all the instructions that we want to have, but you'll notice that we do have a field at the top that says, hey, if a different visit type already has the instructions that you want to use, you can just link to that visit type and use their instructions instead. So you have kind of a central place to manage let's say, all of the instructions for your stress tests and all of the instructions for your echoes. And that's actually what we're going to do. So take a screenshot now if you like my little writing here. And then you're going to follow step 8 on 5.5. You're going to configure our resource type to pull instructions from the echo stress test. We need the same instructions as that visit type, so why recreate the wheel? That's all we need to do there, so we'll hop over to the restrictions form. Now, technically there are 2 restrictions forms. We're going to the first one, not the one under advanced. This screen is all about who is allowed to schedule this appointment. Because if you think about a huge organization, you are going to have people scheduling cardiology exams and radiology exams and outpatient visits and dialysis visits and chemotherapy visits. Lots of different stuff. But we don't want, like, oncology scheduler in this small specialty clinic to be able to schedule a cardiology exam at the hospital. That doesn't match up. So we use the many different settings here to somehow restrict scheduling in one way or another. Now, I've got a slide that has the same screenshot you have on 5.6. And I'm just going to kind of give you the tour of the settings here before we actually make any of our own. So just take a second to watch and review. The top section of this form is about where a user must be logged into. This is something that we almost always set up in Cupid so that we can restrict our visit types to being scheduled in cardiology departments. You might also have like a central scheduling department or an interpreter department that could schedule our visits as well. So we almost always use the top section. We almost never use the middle table, which is restricting based on cadence security class. You might do this if something should only be scheduled by a manager or a supervisor, but that's usually not like a level of security that we particularly need in a cardiology department, so we almost never touch this, and we're not going to touch it during class. We can also restrict something based on a rule. We're going to talk about what a rule is a little bit later in class, but I just want you to think about a rule as configurable logic. So if those first 2 things don't meet your needs, you're like, well, I also want to restrict on this extra other thing. It's not part of this form. Well, you could set your own little bit of logic to do that for you. Finally, we can also restrict scheduling based on an order existing. And one of the things that we learned about in fundamentals is that every single cardiology exam, with very few exceptions, start with an order. We have to order a stress test. We have to order an echo. We have to order an EKG. Someone has to authorize that before we can perform it. So we don't want to be able to schedule an appointment for an EKG that no one has ordered. So we can use this setting at the bottom to say you have to have an order before you can schedule this visit. Now, the exceptions to that might be if you have some sort of screening exam or a follow-up visit that doesn't require its own individual order. So let's make our own settings here. Back in hyperspace, we're in step 10 on 5.6. The first thing that we're going to do is restrict scheduling to departments with a specialty of cardiology. So in the first specialty column, type cardiology. And on the far right side, we can say, all right, do we want to permit cardiology departments to schedule this or restrict, or the opposite of permit is not allowed? We're going to say yes. You can kind of do this one of two ways. You can choose the people that can or choose the people that can't. Permissive or restrictive. Now, we also have a central scheduling department. So in your second line, we're going to write admit central scheduling, admitting / central scheduling, and you're also allowed to schedule. And then finally, we're going to say, all right, if you are part of a department that is not cardiology or central scheduling, you are not allowed to schedule this visit type. So we've got a whole list of allows, we said everyone else not allowed. Two extra things I want to point out before we move on to the next part of this form. The first is that the book does point out you have an interpreter department. You might assign a specialty of interpretation or something like that to those departments. And in that case, you would want to, of course, allow your interpreter department to schedule these exams as well. And there's a whole setup and support guide about interpreter scheduling and an equitable care strategy handbook. You might be working on a project about getting equal and equitable care out to your patient population. Second thing is the book just has a little reminder here as to where we actually set that specialty, because it's something we set this morning. I'm going to hop into my department record just to show you this again. Remember, we built our cardiac NIC departments earlier. Ooh, I'm in the wrong section. We built our cardiology departments earlier, and on the very first screen, what did we do? We said this is a cardiology department. So this is the setting that our visit type is going to be looking to figure out, well, where are you working right now, and is that a cardiology department? All right. Now remember, in Cupid, we rarely use security class as a way to restrict scheduling, so we're going to skip over this. I do want to point out, though, that we have a separate kind of everyone else setting at the bottom of this table. So you want to make sure that you are coordinating the right all others setting with the right table. Now there's this other small setting that I didn't specifically call out before with my slide, but remove restricted providers added by pools and decision trees. That's basically saying during scheduling, if someone is part of that scheduling pool that should not be used for some reason, should I still show them? And we don't want to show them. So we're going to say, yeah, go ahead and remove a scheduling resource that can't actually be scheduled with. Maybe if it's out of commission for some reason. Lastly, we'll say, should we require an order? Yes. We have a couple of variations on yes. You're going to say, yes, yes, yes. Super important, hard requirement. You have to have an order before you can schedule this exam. No sorts of overruling.
Okay.
Alright, those are all the settings we need to make on our restrictions form. Before we move on, there's one kind of really a common troubleshooting thing that I want to point out for you. I have a screenshot here of another visit type. different one. I've set up my specialty restrictions and my security class restrictions, but when I go to test my visit type, I can't schedule it. Can anyone tell me why?